Hola chicos, hoy vamos a repasar un poquito de los objetos indirectos. Además, vamos a aprender un poquito de los objetos directos. Vale, primera cosa son los pronombres. Los pronombres son muy importantes a esta idea. All right, we have the indirect object. That tells us to whom or for whom. This may or should look familiar if you have ever seen the indirect object, the me gusta video, or just been in class and learned how to do that me gusta. We've talked about the indirect object before. This answers to whom or for whom. So in this first person, we have it's to me, to you, to him or her, to us, to y'all, or to them. So we use this indirect object to indicate, like I said, to whom the action is happening or for whom the action is happening. So for everything, we'll just ask the question, who is it happening to? There is a possibility, so keep this in mind, that there is nobody this is happening to, and in which case we'd only use a direct object. For example, and this should look fairly familiar to you, me gusta el perro, a mí. So remember, a lot of times we hear this as being, quote, I like the dog, but in Spanish, we don't actually have a verb to like. It's the verb to please. So in reality, what this is saying is el perro is our subject, gusta is the verb, and me is the indirect object, all right? The dog is pleasing to whom? Me. Los objetos directos son diferentes. These are going to answer the question of what. This is directly correlated with the actual verb, whereas instead of it happening to that person, this is directly coordinated with it. It's a little bit difficult to understand at times, but again, we have me, te, nos, and os, the exact same as indirect objects. But over here, we have lo and la, or los and las, for the different people in the third person, or people are the objects, the nouns in the third person. Lo will go with a masculine and la with a feminine. So use a direct object to indicate what is receiving the action. Te veo, what do I see? You. La abrió, what did he open? It. So some reglas to keep in mind as you're going through these is when both are used, the indirect object is always followed by the direct object. So think ID. Me lo das, you give it to me. You can't lay low, so you can't use the third person singular plus the third person singular. You have to replace lay with say in this case. So instead of lay low, we have say low. Not lay lo das, you give it to him, but say lo das, you give it to him. You may add in the indirect and the direct objects to the end if it's a gerund, or in English it's the ing. In Spanish we see this with a star. We have estoy hablando, I am talking. Estás escuchando, you are listening. That ando is kind of like the ing in Spanish. So we can add it to the end of those. We have hablándoselo, haciéndome. Some examples there. If it is an affirmative command, so if it's a negative command, it's going to go up front, but if it's an affirmative command, they're going to be attached to the back. Dámelo, dímelo. And the final is an infinitive. You can add those to the infinitive. It's kind of rare to see both. It's kind of like this up here at the gerund. You don't typically see both attached to them, but it happens. So for example, we have seguir. There's your infinitive verb, and then ley is the indirect object attached to the end. Seguirle. Comérselo. So now I want to talk a little bit about the formation of these sentences. So in a typical sentence, if you look at this one down here, we have yo, which is in parentheses because remember, unless it's third person, you don't really need to specify your subject because it's implied with the ending of your verb. Yo tiro la pelota a ti. I throw the ball to you. So we have it set up, generally speaking, before we have replaced anything, with verb, direct object, and then to whom. So verb plus what plus to whom on there. The indirect and direct object are actually used to replace these objects in the original. So what we're going to do is take this sentence right here from I throw the ball to you to I throw it to you. So paso uno, identify the verb. In this case, we have tiro. What's the action? Tiro, I throw. Paso dos, identify the object that answers the question of what. So what do I throw? La pelota. So we have verb, we have direct object, and then finally we want to identify the object that answers the question to whom. So to whom do I throw this ball? a ti. And that would be your indirect object. So, paso cuatro, we want to rewrite this sentence replacing the objects, the direct and the indirect object with the pronouns in this order. Subject, indirect object, direct object, verb. The reason I put these in parentheses right here is because you're not necessarily going to have one or the other or both. You might have an indirect object, you might have a direct object, you might have both. We're going to use this as an example because I want to show you how you would put this if you have both. You put indirect first, direct second. If you don't have an indirect object, you will just be putting subject, direct object, verb. If you don't have a direct object, it's subject, indirect object, verb. All right, but if it's both, we have ID, indirect, direct. So let's identify both of these things and replace them. La pelota, your direct object, is third person singular and it's feminine, so we choose the pronoun la. So if you need a refresher on those pronouns, they're on a couple slides back. Then for the indirect object, we have a ti. Ti is second person, so we're going to replace it actually with te, not ti. Whoops. Let's just fix that, pretend it never happened. And then in our final version down here at the bottom, yo, remember I put that in parentheses because it's not necessary. You don't need that yo, but if you want to complete, with your subject and whatnot, you can put the yo in there. Te la tiro. We have our indirect, our direct, and then the verb at the end. Yo te la tiro. All right, vamos a continuar con ejemplos para practicar. So if you have a second, you're watching this video, go ahead and pause this. I want you to change 1 through 5 from the sentences in to being one that uses those indirect and direct objects, just like we did on the previous slide where I took you through that question or that statement of tiro la pelota a ti, and we changed it into te la tiro. We want to do that same idea with these. So go ahead and pause the video, write them down, and then you can hit play so you can go through them with me. All right, so for some answers here, we have, first I want to identify my verb. So I have comes, and then we want to say, we can ask both questions. To whom? To whom do you eat? That doesn't make sense, right? So that kind of limits us to being just a direct object. And el pan is what you eat. So we're going to use a direct object. This is a masculine word, so we use lo. And it goes before the verb, so over here we have lo comes. We took it from you eat the bread to you eat it. Número dos, this is a little bit more confusing, but we're going to go through it. La niña, this is my subject, and it's third person, so that means I need to specify. It could be anything if I'm using that third person, so I want to specify specifically which one. La niña dice la verdad a su mamá. Dice is the action here, so we have our verb right there, followed by la verdad and a su mamá. So if I ask the question to whom, hopefully you see a, and you're like, oh, to. So here's our indirect object, to whom, a su mamá. La verdad then, the question of what. What does she say? La verdad. So we want to swap this around a little bit. We have our direct object, our indirect object. Their direct object here is feminine. We have la. Our indirect object is third singular. Oh no, we have 2/3. What do we do? Because we can't lay low, nor can we lay law. We have to change that lay to a say. So we start with our subject. We add our indirect object, which I said we're going to change from lay to say in this case. And our direct object, which is feminine, third person feminine, la. And then finally the verb, dice. So from la dice la verdad a su mamá, la niña se la dice. Our third example, bebo el agua. Once again, to whom does not really fit here. It's pretty much a what. What do I drink? The water. Do take note, it says el agua, and we have el there, but agua is actually feminine, so it is la bebo. Número 4, habla a nosotros. Again, we have this a right here, which tells me it's happening to somebody. So over yonder we have nos habla. Número 5. Tiras la basura a ti. We have our verb. We have our direct object, the what, and then finally we have an indirect object, to whom. So I change her over, te la tiras. Hopefully, I know that was really quick, but hopefully it kind of helped you to see the differences with the indirect and direct objects. I know it's kind of difficult to understand sometimes as a second language for Spanish because in English we have them, but we never really talk about them, and we definitely don't switch the whole sentence around like you do in Spanish. So hopefully that's helped you out. If it's not, I can always make another video on it. Adios.